We ready?
Yep.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this December ordinary meeting of the Sunshine Coast Council. I want to welcome all the councillors, all of our staff, members of the public, and those who are joining us on live stream for this, which is to be the last meeting here in the Caloundra chambers. And I'll pass it over a little later to Councillor Landsberg to record that event. And that in itself is, an important step forward, but, one that brings a few memories as well. In fact, I was only just out on the veranda outside my office. I'd never been out there before. After meeting here for 10 years. So it just goes to show, people will be happy to know I don't have a veranda on my new office, but changing times. I'd like to ask everybody to be upstanding as we ask Councillor Dixon to provide the acknowledgement of Traditional Custodians. Thank you, Councillor.
Good morning, everybody. On behalf of Council, I would like to start by acknowledging the Traditional Custodians of the Sunshine Coast local government area. We recognise that these have always been places of cultural, spiritual, social and economic significance. The Traditional Custodians' unique values and ancient and enduring cultures deepen and enrich the life of our community. We commit to working in partnership with Traditional Custodians and broader First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to support self-determination through economic and community development. Truth-telling is a significant part of our journey. We are committed to better understanding the collective history of the Sunshine Coast and the experiences of First Nations people. Legacy issues resulting from colonisation are still experienced by Traditional Custodians and First Nations people today. We recognise our shared history and will continue to work in partnership to provide a foundation for building a shared future with the Cubby Cubby and Yinabara people. We wish to pay respect to the elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role of First Nations people and the role they continue to play within the Sunshine Coast community. Together, we are all stronger.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. I'd now like to invite Reverend Ralph Bowles from the Nambour Anglican Church to read the prayer. Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you. Let us pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for this beautiful part of Australia, we call the Sunshine Coast, with its coast, its plains, its hinterland hills, the traditional country of the Cubby Cubby and Yinabara peoples. Please guide this council as the members manage the business of our city on behalf of its residents and businesses. Grant them wisdom as they make decisions in big matters as well as in the everyday life concerns of the people of this city. Bless the councillors and its officers as they manage development and growth, deal with issues, sometimes contentious and always important, that come before the council. In all the discussions of this council, may this council be a place for good deliberation and constructive outcomes that advance the quality of our natural environment, the conduct of business and the lives of people. Where there is disagreement, Lord God, may sound process and goodwill bring progress for all. We ask your blessing too on all those who serve our city in the work of the Sunshine Coast Council's operations. They are the face and hands of this council in interactions with residents and businesses of our city. Thank you for their service. For today's meeting, Lord God, we ask for a fresh encouragement to renew the councillors in their work to advance the welfare of the Sunshine Coast. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Bowles.
Thank you.
Well done. Please be seated. We have Councillor Cox joining us via Teams. Good morning, Councillor. And I have an apology from Councillor Johnston. Would somebody move the receipt and confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 17th of November 2022, please? Councillor Natoli, thank you. And a seconder, Councillor Hungerford. All those in favour of receipt? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. There is no mayoral minute. Item 6 is regarding conflicts of interest, and I'll just remind councillors of the requirements of Chapter 5B of the Local Government Regulation 2012, which sets out how councillors' conflicts of interest are managed in local government matters. These requirements apply to how we will deal with such matters at this meeting. We have no procedural motion. Our first item is presentations and councillors' years of service awards. I might just go over to the three. Yep, okay. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge a number of councillors who have reached significant milestones in their local government representative careers. These awards are provided by the Local Government Association of Queensland and provide recognition and hopefully an encouragement to the recipients for the great work they do in representing their communities. Now, some of these were presented at the LGAQ conference in Cairns earlier this year for those councillors who attended, but for the benefit of those who weren't in attendance, I will present them today, but I want to acknowledge all of the councillors. So first I'd like to acknowledge Councillor Rick Babarowski, who has achieved 10 years of representative service at the Sunshine Coast Council. Well done, Councillor. A round of applause, please. Councillor, you might like to just come out here and we'll get a photograph in due course. Councillor Peter Cox has also achieved 10 years of representative service to the Sunshine Coast community. And whilst Peter's not with us in person today, we acknowledge his contribution as well. Thank you, Peter. I'd like to invite Councillor Jason O'Prey to come forward. He's also achieved 10 years of service to the Division 8 community of the Sunshine Coast region. Well done, Councillor. Congratulations. Thank you. Just wait there and we'll get a joint pick in a moment. Councillor Joe Natoli has achieved 15 years of service to the Sunshine Coast community. Thanks, Joe. Councillor Christian Dixon has achieved 16 years of service to the Sunshine Coast community this year. Well done, Councillor Dixon. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge Councillor Ted Hungerford, who's achieved 18 years of service to the Sunshine Coast community this year. Well done, Ted. Please come out, Rick, and we'll get a photograph. You can hold that. Okay. You can. Why not?
Why not?
We're all here together then.
Gentlemen, if you could just squeeze a little tighter for me and actually hold it like that would be nice. Just before it's
If I may, obviously I'd like on behalf of the other councillors and the community to honour the Mayor and acknowledge Mayor Mark Jamieson on achieving his milestone of 10 years of representative service to the Sunshine Coast. He also, as did I, received a certificate at the LGAQ conference. But it's also worth mentioning that our Mayor has been the President of the Local Government Association of Queensland since 2016. And I think we have benefited and been very fortunate to have his representation as a region. And he has certainly brought his experience to that role. Look, I think we're all clear that Mayor Mark Jamieson made a fantastic transition from the corporate world to the political public service world. And that was not easy or even obvious. So we'd like to acknowledge the years of service that you've put in and congratulate you on a decade of service to local government, to Queensland and our community. Well done.
Thank you.
Jason, can you just take your right shoulder behind Joe for me? Very nice. It's a bit sliding one half a step that way. Keep straight down the gentleman.
Well done. Thanks, everybody. Okay, now on this special occasion here in the Caloundra Chambers, I'd like to invite Councillor Terry Landsberg to acknowledge this historic occasion as we meet officially as a council for the last time in Caloundra. That's not to say our representation for Caloundra and all other parts of the Sunshine Coast will change in any way, merely where we will meet in future. Over to you, Councillor Landsberg.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And first of all, I'd just like to congratulate my fellow councillors on their milestone of their achievements in their service to our community. It's hugely inspiring to me as a first-term councillor to witness and learn from the experience in this room. So well done, thank you. As it's our last OM here in Caloundra, obviously I'd like to just run through a couple of things about the significance of this building and the area. Landsborough Shire Council chambers in Bulcock Street, Caloundra, were built in 1968 and served as council chambers until 1995. The Caloundra City Council chambers were moved into this building on the 25th of July 1995, and with this building was officially opened by the then Mayor Des Dwyer. Designed by architects Peddle Thorpe, this 6,500 square metre building was built to service one of Australia's fastest growing regions, as the local media comments of the day were recorded. In 1995, our Sunshine Coast population was approximately 198,000 people. Today, we're sitting at around 359,000 and still one of the fastest growing regions. These chambers have provided to council one of the most important functions of local government, the decision-making process of council meetings to give direction to our CEO for implementation. And one of the chamber's highlights was the decision to approve the Mullaney Golf Club, with the Mayor Don Aldis and Deputy Mayor Don Smith at the helm at the time. It's one of the highest, most scenic golf courses in Australia. I've played there myself. It actually sits on, I think, the top 200 golf courses in Australia. So at the time, it was a real compliment to the Mullaney residents, and it was actually originally led by the inaugural President, Max Whitten. But any of the, I'm sure, former councillors that were here or staff members were here, it was a pretty eventful occasion here in these chambers. 1995 was also the year the internet took off and opened up worldwide connectivity and huge possibilities. And today we have the fibre optic sea cable, which is a significant milestone of our new City Hall. The connectivity we have allows council to embrace new smart city framework, which will enable us to record, measure and collect data to improve our efficiencies and decision making across all our multiple departments. But as we depart this building, works will commence next year for it to become the first new district library of the Sunshine Coast in over 20 years. And as part of the Caloundra Centre activation project, this building will include a customer service centre, 500 square metres of community service opportunities. We'll also have a junior library, open foyer and events space plus more. But on leaving that, I'd just like to thank the Chair and also the fellow councillors as well for the opportunity to address on the significance of this building. I think it's time for a change and we're all looking forward to moving to Sunshine Coast City Hall, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Landsberg. We'll go on to the first item of business for the day, which is item 8.1, Creative Industries Investment Program funding for 23 to 25. And I invite Janine Simmons to give us a presentation. Thank you, Janine.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr Mayor and Councillors. This report seeks endorsement of the panel's recommendations for the Regional Arts Development Fund's Creative Industries Investment Program. The Regional Arts Development Fund, or RADF, is an annual partnership between the state government through Arts Queensland and Sunshine Coast Council, who apply for the fund annually. This new program will provide up to 3 years of funding for established arts and cultural initiatives that support the strategic development of the local arts ecology and deliver significant cultural benefit to the region in line with the Sunshine Coast Arts Plan. The program will be offered once per financial year, and registered not-for-profit organisations, groups, collectives and businesses are eligible to apply. The framework and criteria for the program was developed to ensure an equitable, accountable and transparent process for the creation of funding partnerships between council and the applicants. These partnerships include the opportunity to participate in a capacity development program. This will be for all applicants, whether they are successful or not in achieving funding. Extensive consultation was undertaken in developing the program with Council Sunshine Coast Arts Advisory Board, with the RADF Assessment Panel, as well as Arts Queensland and relevant internal areas. The program was promoted via direct mail, website, newsletters and social media. Council received 18 expressions of interest, of which 16 were invited to a full application. The RADF Assessment Panel consists of 6 external category experts across relevant creative arts disciplines, and they assess the applications to determine the level of funding and recommended using the program guidelines, priorities and assessment criteria. Guidance is also given to panel members to ensure sound governance. The budget for this new year program is $130,000 annually, with $90,000 from the Sunshine Coast Arts and Heritage Levy and $40,000 through RADF. Council received a total of 13 applications requesting over $260,000. The panel recommended funding for 7 applications, or 54% of applicants. Based on information from the 7 recommended applications, council investment of $130,000 will support 144 creative arts practitioners and producers, of which 22 are First Nations, engage over 9,500 participants and audience members from the Sunshine Coast community, facilitate 112 volunteers and 35 partnerships. Lastly, for that $130,000 investment, over $485,000 of creative initiatives will be delivered to the region, representing $3.5 return for every dollar invested. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Someone to move? Councillor Babarowski, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Natoli, thank you. Would you like to open, Councillor Babarowski?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It'd be my pleasure. Councillors, this is a really fantastic maturation of our response and our approach to arts development on the coast. Look, this is all about capacity development. It leverages off one of the most successful arts development programs in Queensland's history, the RADF program, Regional Arts Development Fund, and utilises the resources of our relatively new Arts and Heritage Levy. Really what it does is so that every single human being is creative. And as much as we might reluctantly admit it or even express it, this is a way of saying that we don't want to just watch other people's content as a region. We want to develop complex, sophisticated, intriguing, inspiring content ourselves as a region. And you're not going to do that if it's just on a project-by-project basis, which is what essentially we've done with our funding programs up to now. This gives you some certainty for 1 to 3 years for a lot of those organisations that really do need to focus on the outcomes, not the operational side of things. Operational regulation, the world of regulation is very, very complex in the world we live in now, and it takes a lot of energy. This basically says the community will give you some resources to give you some help with that. So it's a really good strategic maturation of our approach to developing what the 20-year arts plan says, which is an arts ecology. Now, an arts ecology by definition is self-organising, but you don't get to self-organising if you never get to a mature point where you can help yourselves with the right resources. It doesn't get there. So this is a really important strategic move for us, and I really ask you to support this, the recommendations in this report. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. Councillor Dixon.
Through the chair, and if you don't mind the question, I know that when we do give grants, we do ask for an acknowledgement in terms of council support, but I was just wondering what kind of feedback do you actually get from the individuals and groups in terms of the grants that we do provide? What type of feedback do we get? Do we often hear the success stories coming back through to the staff, and any insights or examples would be great?
Through you, Mr Mayor. We have an acquittal process, so every applicant will have to acquit. This is a new program, as Councillor Babarowski alluded to, so it will be a 3-year partnership, so it will probably be a little bit more strategic, really working with them on sustainable business model operation and development. So this one is a new program, but we have had some of these successful applicants and have come through the RADF program on a project basis, so they're now moving into this, which is a stepping stone to bigger and better things into the future.
No further speakers. You'd like to close, Councillor Babarowski?
Very briefly, because look, I think everybody recognises that this is really about producing more content at a better standard for everybody to enjoy. So it'll be hopefully embedded in our everyday experience of what it is to live on the Sunshine Coast. I guess you would all note that the balance of funding is perhaps weighted very strongly from Council and our arts levy. So I'd like to take this opportunity to remind the state what an amazingly successful program the RADF program is. And in my observation, I've been involved with it for about 30 years. I hate saying a big number like that. They should increase the funding. Look, fundamentally, Arts Queensland should look to this program as a model and put more resources into it. So I'd like to take that opportunity for that. But the other thing I'd like to finish with is sincere thanks to the officers. The team have put together a really good development of the program, so thank you for that. I'd like to thank the Arts Board for their endorsement of that and their input into this. Arts Queensland. I'm generally a bit reluctant to slap Arts Queensland on the back, but this is one where they really have gone on the journey with us. And mostly for the RADF assessment panel. They're volunteers, they're literally the fabric of our community, and they put such heart and soul into the assessments of the applications. And this would have been very challenging for them, but they'd intuitively know the community will love this one. This is something the community will understand. It may take a little while, but they'll really understand the value of this program. So congratulations, and should you support this today, councillors, you'll have a very grateful RADF panel, but an even more grateful community.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks, Janine. Let's move on to item 8.2, which is major event sponsorship for Queensland Oztag Championships, and I invite Lucy to give us a presentation. Thanks, Lucy.
Yes, good morning, Mr Mayor. Good morning, councillors. Here to discuss the Queensland Oztag Championships from 2023 through to 25-26, and just a reminder that the information outlined in the attachments is confidential. So councillors supported the Queensland Oztag Championships since 2017, with 4 events taking place across the championships annually, each of which fall outside of the peak tourism period. It contributes the highest combined economic impact benefits for all major events, with a projected $28.2 million projected into our local economy. Queensland Oztag is a Sunshine-based organisation with 5 full-time staff located here at the stadium, at the head office in Caloundra, and they're the largest event user of the Sunshine Coast Stadium. They also benefit local sporting clubs which are engaged to support their events through providing different services across the championships through the year. In terms of the sponsorship approval process, Council's major event sponsorship program is overseen by the Sunshine Coast Events Board, who provide expert independent advice to Council. So the board has a highly successful governance structure that is highly respected by Council, the industry and event promoters, and our application process is known as one of the strongest across the state. For those who aren't quite as familiar with the game itself, Oztag is similar to touch football and it's non-tackling, and the tag is difficult to remove, so it prevents phantom calls. And the event organiser in 2021-22 had over 42,000 people participate in the championships across the year, and we're expecting those numbers to increase in future years. So the 4 events proposed to support over the coming years are the Junior State Cup, which is competition for under 10s to under 17s, the Senior State Cup, the Super Series, which is an interstate event, and the All Schools Championship, which is the equivalent to the State Cup but within the school system. In terms of event sustainability, our unit does continue to work with all of the events that we sponsor through our program, and one of the sustainability and environmental practices that they currently use are a paperless registration system, and also a set-up of their tournament timelines so that it reduces the need for unnecessary travel and means that there is the least number of people at the stadium at any one time. Following the tournaments, tags and balls and other equipment are donated to local clubs and schools for their use, so ensuring that those items are benefiting the community. In terms of other community benefits, there are a number of local sporting clubs that are involved and receive significant benefit out of their involvement in supporting Queensland Oztag's events. And as you can see, we've got between $3,000 and $15,000 generated for each of these clubs on an annual basis, which is a significant fundraising for them. Oztag Queensland also has a really close relationship with UniSC, engaging students for work experience, and we have seen that several of those students that have done voluntary work with them have then gone on to be employed by the organisation on a longer term basis. So the recommendation is that Council receive and note the report titled Major Event Sponsorship, Queensland Oztag Championships 2023 through to 2025-26, and authorise the Chief Executive Officer to negotiate and execute a contract for this event.
Thank you, Lucy. Someone to move, please. Councillor O'Prey. Seconder, Councillor Landsberg. Thank you. Would you like to open, Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you. Firstly and foremostly, I absolutely have to thank the staff on this one, particularly Lucy in a new role, stepping up and doing again the presentation today. Thank you, Lucy. To Andy, of course, in the stands. But Mr Mayor, most importantly, to Peter Egan, who, after 19 years of service, has retired last week, and I was very lucky to have a beer with him on Friday afternoon. It was a wonderful occasion, and there's a lot of staff there, and you can tell that he was a very well-respected man. And we had a number of awards given today for our service, but he did 19 years for Council, so thank you to you, Peter. Mr Mayor, Oztag is our new triathlon. For decades, for 30 years, the Sunshine Coast has been famous for triathlons. We've got the Noosa Triathlon, of course, the Mooloolaba Triathlon, the Caloundra Triathlon, the Pink Triathlon, the Schools Triathlons. We had the 70.3, we had the World Championships of 70.3 in 2016. Triathlon. But Oztag is where we're at right now. It's a new age, and this is going to bring in tens of millions of dollars of economic benefit to our region. This is enormous. This is so good. We've got 4 main events coming on here. We've got the Junior State Cup, the Senior State Cup, we've got the All Schools Championship, and of course we've also got the Super Series, which will generate a lot more media and social media interest. The massive community benefits in this are wrapped around the sporting clubs that are there as well. So that you would have seen one of the slides that Lucy's shown that the Rugby Union Club and some of the other clubs, the smaller associations wrapped around the stadium, are going to make some sausages and bread rolls and selling poppers and cans of Coke, and they're going to make a few bucks for their club. So the community benefit there is massive. But ultimately, this is about bringing people to our region and dropping $28 million, a pot of gold, into the Sunshine Coast region. We're going to bring outside money into the Sunshine Coast and drop $28 million for our mum and dad's businesses to take a piece of the pie. And that's really what this is all about, and it's what our whole major event strategy is all about. So this is probably going to, I would almost assure you, this will be in our top 3 as soon as we say yes to this today. The only other thing I want to bring to your attention is that this event has already got the funding based inside the decisions that we've made through our budget throughout the year. This makes no impact whatsoever. We're not asking for a cent here today. The budgeting has already been aligned. It sits within the major events program. It sits within all the funding in the budget that sits there, and we can make sure and be reassured that this funding is there and it's available today. So we just need to make sure that it's very clean. There's no ask. and that the budgeting is already there. So thank you very much to Lucy and the staff, and I look forward to your support today, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Prey. No further speakers? No need to close, Councillor? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Lucy, very much. We'll move to item 8.3, which is the November 2022 Financial Performance Report. Invite Isaac to give us a presentation. Thanks, Isaac.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, all. Here to present the November 2022 Financial Performance Report. Council, at the end of November, we have a positive operating result of $67 million, which is positive to the expected budget by $1.6 million. Revenues are above the budget of $4.9, with expenditure also above the budget of $3.2 million. In terms of the holiday park fees continue to be above the expected budget for November, as well as our return on investments due to increasing change in interest rate conditions. With our expenditure, the unbudgeted operational costs for the floods that occurred in February to April is now $930,000. We're also experiencing inflationary impacts for rise and fall contracts for some service delivery areas. The capital works program has progressed 29.3%, with an $86.7 million expenditure on our $29.5 million capital works program, and the core program sitting at the same percentage, 29.8%. Our cash for the end of the month was $326 million, with our debt still remaining the same at $472 million. And our investment performance has slightly increased, with still 16 term deposits at $160 million at 3.58% average return. Council, the recommendation is to receive and note the report titled November 2022 Financial Performance Report.
Thank you, Isaac. Someone to move? Councillor Hungerford. A seconder, Councillor Natali. Would you like to open, Councillor Hungerford?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, another very strong result. With a positive operating result of $36 million, and that's $1.6 million above the current budget as of the end of November. $244 million operating revenue has been achieved, which is $4.9 million above the current budget. $208 million has been expended, resulting in a variance of $3.3 million. Now, this is 1.6% higher than budget. To explain that, materials and services are above budget due to $930,000 unbudgeted expenditure on the February and April 22 disasters, the major rain events we had. But these will form part of Council's disaster claim submission to the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. And we should get the bulk of that back. Council has incurred additional expenditure on contracts relating to service delivery areas due to the impact of increasing inflation. The contracts include landscape, turf maintenance, public amenity, cleaning and waste collection services. The increasing costs are impacting on us there. $86.7 million, or 29.3%, of our $295.5 million capital works program has been financially expended, and we're on target. Hopefully we get the weather this year so we can carry that right through and get to the 90-95% we'd like to achieve. Other important one I'd like to point out is our cash. As at the end of November, it's $326 million. And more importantly, Council's debt is $472 million. Remembering, with our region building programs, they've reached a peak of $643 million, I think, from memory, on the top of my head. Now we're down to $472. That's because of our strong focus on those projects being self-funding and a benefit to the community into the future. That's a very strong result to have there. We are on track. I thank Finance for their work in this area and all the areas in Council, because we're exactly where we need to be at this point in the financial year. And if we keep a strong focus like that, we'll end up with a very good year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Dixon.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I thought this would be a good opportunity to touch on the capital grant funded project report update. So many people would realise that the state and federal governments have actually put a lot of money into local councils right across Queensland and Australia. And all divisions on the Sunshine Coast have done very well in that space. But I just wanted to pay particular mention to a recent project that just opened in Division 6. And So far, the project has nearly accumulated about $1 million in funding through council and the state government. But I had the pleasure of joining Jason Hutt, the member for Caloundra. He actually came up from Caloundra to Sippy Downs in the last few weeks to help me open Sippy Downs' first district park within the estate. So we've got this brand new district level park on the lake, shade sails, beautiful play tower. It's just really starting to catch up with the rest of the Sunshine Coast, and we've even got plans to put a toilet facility in there in the future. But I just wanted to acknowledge that these aren't just council's achievements. People often say we wish levels of government would work together. This is clearly an example where our staff and politicians across varying levels of government are actually delivering outcomes, and it's not fair for me to stand here today and just say this is all on council. We do owe credit to the Queensland state government and also the federal government for their support of this council.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Law.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. Just have a question, please, around how we've gone with rate collection from the first rate notice and what your thoughts are for the second one in terms of CPI is going up. It may have sort of slowed down in its upward movements, but we've just had an increase from the interest rates from the federal government. Can you let me know how have we gone with our first rates collection? Is that about normal, or are more people struggling? Are those who are on a payment plan, are they struggling at the moment with all of the cost of living rises? And what are your thoughts for the second rates notice at the start of next year?
Sure. Through Mr Mayor, so in terms of the actual percentage of paid or unpaid rates, they're about the same as they have been in previous times. That does, although our rateable properties has increased, there's a slight increase in terms of the number, but in terms of the actual dollar amount, it's the same. So we will see how we go. So the next rate run is in January, but that will be the telling time, I'd say. So.
Okay. But are you concerned? It doesn't sound like you're concerned, but you're okay, you're comfortable with how it's sitting, and as a reflection of how the community's doing, it seems normal and okay.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor. So in terms of the July rate run, yes, very comfortable.
Okay.
Look, I feel like we've got really good policies in place in terms of hardship claims, contactable all the time. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'd certainly agree that the structure we have around to help people is very, very good, and I'm grateful that we've got that there. Thank you very much. No other questions.
Thank you, Councillor Law. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Hopefully you can hear me. Just following on from what Councillor Hungerford said earlier about the healthy state of our finances at the moment. Obviously the report speaks to the cash in the bank and obviously the debt at hand. And when someone does the simple calculation, it works out to be less than $1,000 per rateable property as a debt held against, tens of billions of dollars worth of assets. So we're in a very healthy state in that respect. But in speaking to one of those core assets being our stormwater system, I note in the report that it refers to the percentage of our relining program that's been completed to date, sitting at less than about 25%. And that concerns me because we all know that our stormwater assets are ageing and they need more maintenance. So I was just hopeful that, probably not a question for today to be answered by finance staff, but hoping the CEO could bring us a bit of an update at some stage in the budgetary process, either later this year or early next year, because I have some concerns over the state of those assets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Noted by the CEO. No further speakers. Can I go back to Councillor Hungerford to close? Not necessary. Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 8.4, and thank you, Isaac. Item 8.4, Sunshine Coast e-bike and/or e-scooter trial. I welcome Nikki Clements and Shana to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr Mayor and Councillors. The purpose of this report is to seek council endorsement to introduce an e-bike and/or e-scooter trial on the Sunshine Coast and to endorse the proposed expression of interest process. Safety has been a key consideration for the implementation of a trial. The Department of Transport and Main Roads have recently updated its rules and regulations regarding the use of e-bikes and e-scooters. Sorry. On November 1, the state introduced legislation to limit e-scooter speeds to the default 12 km per hour on shared paths and 25 km on dedicated bikeways. The introduction and use of e-mobility on the Sunshine Coast is supported by the integrated transport strategy and including encourages greater use of e-bikes, e-scooters and other emerging e-mobility travel options, supports end-to-end trip for travellers, allows for collaboration with the state government and other agencies to ensure pedestrian and cycling networks safely support emerging personal mobility devices. Council approval is required for businesses to offer the hire of e-mobility devices from public land. Ahead of considering a more permanent or long-term arrangement, Council officers propose to undertake an 18-month trial to determine if e-mobility hire on the Sunshine Coast is suitable. To encourage more sustainable travel choice on the Sunshine Coast, it is proposed to introduce an e-bike and e-scooter trial in Maroochydore and Mooloolaba. This is to coincide with Maroochydore being the region's principal activity and major business centre, and Mooloolaba being a major tourism destination. Introduction of a trial in Maroochydore and Mooloolaba will allow Council to establish if hire options for these devices would be successful in already heavily populated areas and nearby significant residential areas. Additional locations may be added to the trial area at the request of the successful applicants and subject to assessment and further consideration. Operators will be required to define virtual designated parking zones and e-mobility hubs within the identified trial area, and riders would also use Operators app to find parking locations and access the devices for a fee. There are several benefits associated with a trial local law permit, including the ability to introduce permit conditions which promote self-regulation, put safety first and provide rules and regulations for use. Provides greater flexibility in terms of addressing non-compliance, including the cancellation of a permit, supports local buy initiatives, ensures council-controlled land is maintained for its primary purpose, and ensures complaints and issues handling processes are the responsibility of the permit holder. In particular, inappropriately parked e-bikes and or e-scooters would be the responsibility of the preferred operators, with all complaints directed to the relevant provider. It is proposed that an expression of interest process for the purpose of sourcing one or two established and experienced proponents to operate the e-bike and or e-scooter business on the Sunshine Coast in a trial arrangement incorporating council-controlled land. If the trial is supported, the expression of interest will be open for 8 weeks from the 12th of December to the 3rd of February 2023, and following an assessment process, successful applicants will be able to commence operations from 1 April 2023. To reduce the timeline for commencing the trial, it is recommended that the CEO be delegated to award the permits based on weighted selection criteria and assessment panel's recommendations. Implementation of the expression of interest process would be undertaken in accordance with the existing council adopted policies, including the community land and complementary commercial activity policy, council's local laws and relevant legislation. There is specific information pertaining to the details of the trial, and the conditions of approval are included in the Sunshine Coast e-bike and or e-scooter trial information pack, which is available in attachment 1. Submissions will be assessed against weighted selection criteria, including professionalism, quality of equipment, sustainability, safety, community, and the need to nominate a commercial arrangement. Submissions, the EOR process would be inclusive of application fees, and applicants would be required, as I said, to nominate a commercial arrangement. And today's officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Councillor Babarowski. Seconded, Councillor Dixon. Would you like to open, Councillor Babarowski?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Councillors, I think this council and the community, on behalf of the community, have taken a really sensible, conservative approach to introducing e-bikes and e-scooters into our community via commercial services. It's given us the opportunity to really wait a little while and see what the technology does, what the community response has been, and to develop an approach to it that's going to be, very importantly and understandably, safety first. So we're talking about a trial, as I'm sure you appreciate. That's for us to make sure that we can learn even more about how you manage what is a really important development of mobility. But it comes with some tensions and some risks, particularly on shared pathways. But here's a trial which gives us an ability to control many of the variables: where they go, what speeds they travel at, who's on them. So that's a tremendous advantage over the private market, which is essentially if you buy an e-bike, you can use it wherever you like. And generally speaking, they're not limited in the same degree in terms of speeds and who's on them. So this is a very, very sensible approach to take. So, councillors, it is important that we join something of a mobility revolution and ask our community to accept this trial, give us good feedback, let's see how we go. And, councillors, I hope that you'll support the recommendation today.
Thank you, Councillor Dabrowski. Councillor Dixon.
Through you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to the Deputy Mayor. That was a great introduction. When I talk to people locally, I always ask them the question, what are your top 3 issues on the Sunshine Coast? I want to know what your problems are, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to fix them and solve them. And people talk about traffic and congestion all the time, and it usually goes traffic and congestion and development and lack of infrastructure. So council's actually here today with a great recommendation to try and combat the traffic, because if we do nothing and people keep driving cars, sure, we can upgrade roads and that costs a lot of money, and sometimes things get better, but when population catches up, the roads are back to square one because they just get oversaturated. So as a scooter user myself, I've done 763 kilometres, I checked this morning, since May, work case. So left the car at home, charged the scooter on the solar during the day, and have been able to ride that to work meetings. And some people have said it's a bit strange seeing their councillor turn up with a bike helmet and a scooter, but they've also said that's great because you've actually taken your car off the road. And you think about all the flow-on effects with that, and climate change and emissions and whatnot. But here's actually a really smart alternative, because what we're doing is we're saying we're going to have a controlled process. We're going to trial it. We're going to make sure that whoever the successful business is, and in my view, hopefully it's a local business who's already shown their wares to the coast. That'd be a great thing for the community. But that'll be up to the selection panel. What this will actually do is give us some control, where you can go, the speeds that you can travel, potentially the ages of people who can actually sign up and get the app and use the scooters. When I talk to people locally, they're usually afraid of the small minority. They're out and about riding double on the scooter, doing 60, 70 kilometres an hour on footpaths and roads that have, absolutely ruined it for most people. I've talked to Councillor Hungerford, and I've seen examples myself where people are driving their cars at 60 kilometres an hour and someone scoots past with no helmet, and you think, I really hope they don't get hurt. But people don't need to worry about this in the trial, because this will be controlled, this will be selective. This is in areas where there are great footpaths and connectivity options, and that's one thing that's really important about the trial. But we need to try something different, because if people are out there today thinking that cars are bad, cars are really jamming up the environment and slowing your trip to work, we need alternatives, and those alternatives can be e-bikes, e-scooters. The new City Hall has got change facilities and the ability for people to be able to ride their electronic bikes and scooters to work, and push bikes and have a shower and get changed. We need more of that across the region. What we can't do is just keep building the infrastructure for cars. The one thing I wanted to touch on, though, while I'm on the subject of scooters, is a very big push by people locally to actually get council to consider, and I know we are, but consider signposting areas where scooter riders can actually do the 25 kilometres an hour. And I speak firsthand. A trip that used to take me about 11 minutes from my home to the university is now 20 plus minutes because I'm limited at 12 kilometres an hour, and I struggle because the minimum speed on my scooter is 15, and to throttle it at 12 it's actually quite dangerous because it gets a bit of a thrust on the engine on the back, the motor. So I think the government's done the right thing to acknowledge that there is an issue, because there certainly is, and there's people flouting the law. But I think we need to show a little bit of leadership. If we've got some selected pathways around the region, maybe it's the large pathway between Sippy Downs up to Kawana, maybe even to Maroochydore. We could look at signposting that to 25 so people can get to work efficiently. I think there's a lot we can do in this space, but the best thing for us to do here is to start this trial, communicate with our residents and show the community that we can do better, and that starts with trials like this and taking a risk. I'm really thankful the staff have driven this process, and this has my full support.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Hungerford.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to ask questions because I have reservations about this with what's happened in the past, especially with the private ones. I see this as an 18-month trial with a review at 9 to 12 months. Now, the Department of Transport and Main Roads, as Krishna said, have brought in new rules regarding the e-bikes. They've introduced a legislation to limit the e-scooter speeds to default 12 kilometres an hour on shared paths and 25 kilometres on dedicated bikeways from the 1st of November, so that's already come in place. Who is responsible for regulating that?
Through you, Mr Mayor. The regulation of speed is a matter for the Queensland Police. The idea of the trial arrangement and the ability with the expression of interest is relying on the experience and the expertise of the operators to come to us with their proposed route, and we would obviously assess that to determine suitability and how that route will be appropriate in terms of pedestrian safety. In addition to that, the arrangements around the active transport network is working alongside the state government following the introduction of these new changes or the changes to the rules and regulations, and may involve signposting with additional regulations around use of e-scooters on certain paths.
Further, it says here, operators can regulate the operation of the e-scooter fleet using technology. They can do it, but the private ones we haven't got much control over, only the legislation and the police regulating that. What can they do on these to make it so that they do stay within those speed limits?
The technology that through you, Mr Mayor, apologies. Through you, Mr Mayor, the technology allows operators to provide speed limiting and GPS technology to be able to manage where and when those scooters are or e-bikes are. The intention is that the technology has the ability to restrict the speed so that people do the right thing. That's the intention.
And the final one, the operators can also suspend, delete user accounts if complaints are received. So if this is putting the responsibility back on the permit holder, how do people know between the private ones and these ones? Will it be clearly visible that what they are, the company and that, and will they have a number on them so people can report the vehicle that was making the infringement or the nuisance, and have people know who to complain to, how to submit that complaint?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the idea of the expression of interest process is for the operators to put forward their approach and their business model around managing complaints, etc. For instance, there is in other areas or other local government areas identifying providers based on colour of scooter. So that is also an identifying opportunity in terms of understanding who that scooter might belong to. But in terms of the complaint management process, and based on the information that I have available to me, the understanding is that there is arrangements in place that an operator will need to utilise an app. The operators have the ability to ban a user if there has been ongoing concerns around their use of that scooter, and therefore exclude them from even being able to turn a scooter on.
So with that, if my office receives complaints, one of my residents complains about it, can identify. So I'm taking it from the time of day, where it is, the operator will know whose scooter that was. Will we be reporting those complaints onto things that are set up there for my PA to be able to pass that on straight away?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intention of the local law permit gives the capacity for the community land permits team to ensure that any complaints are referred back to the operator to handle. The intention will be that they will have their own complaint management process, and the permit will be conditioned accordingly that they would need to manage that on their own. That will be their responsibility.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a few questions for you, Nikki. The condition specifies that they can't exceed the maximum number of e-bikes and e-scooters, but I couldn't see anywhere here what the maximum number is. Could you maybe clarify that for me?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intent of the permit conditions is to allow the experience of those operators to provide their preference in relation to their fleet or the number of fleet that they will have as part of the trial. That again will be assessed. The idea around it is also that if there is an opportunity for growth and for them to expand that based on take-up and user use of those particular devices, the intent is more so around understanding what the capacity of the trial is and what that tolerance, I suppose, in relation to the Sunshine Coast community and how we can manage that in conjunction with the other pedestrian users of those footpaths, etc.
And I suppose that leads to the question, shared pathways. Who has right of way? Who has, I suppose, the right of way when it comes, is it pedestrians, normal bikes, scooters, people, prams, all those sorts of things.
Sure.
So, and that comes to the whole question of how many more devices and things are going to be potentially in those very clustered and busy pathways.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intention is that pedestrians will always have the right of way. The idea is that the scooter will ensure that that pedestrian clearance is available for someone to walk past, and that is conditioned appropriately in the trial local law permit. In terms of those heavily populated footpaths or part of the active transport network, if there is for example, a need for us to exclude a particular area, for example, the boardwalk from Maroochydore, from the top of the Northern Parklands down to the Lilith View, it may be reasonable for us to actually exclude completely any e-scooter use, given those high volumes of pedestrians in that area, and utilise other alternative routes for the e-scooter use.
And my final question is more about what processes will you have in place to be able to, first of all, to road test how effective the geofencing is going to be?
Sure.
And then, as the trial starts, what checks and balances in terms of making sure that, almost like the secret customer, like testing whether they're accepting underage children or drunks or, whether those type of things which are currently able to be done.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Again, the EOI encourages experienced and well-versed operators in relation to this particular industry in regards to how they operate their businesses. The understanding of those operators is that they have the models or the business approaches in place to be able to ensure that the users of those particular devices are adhering to the requirements that they have in place. That is also a requirement for them from an insurance perspective, that they obviously need to make sure that those riders are, or those users of those devices are doing the right thing. I understand that they have appropriate arrangements in place that ensure that those checks and balances are undertaken.
So, thank you, Nikki. If I can speak to the motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Nikki. I know that this has been a lot of work in coming, and I know George and the team have had a lot to do. And I was approached earlier in the year about wanting to support a trial, and I wasn't prepared to support it until the new legislation came in particular the speed limits. I do feel for the police because I think this legislation is totally unworkable in terms of dealing with speed and the police expectation that they're going to solve all the problems that we've got. It's not going to happen. Common sense is what we need. My biggest concern is obviously privately owned e-scooters, because they can be modified, they can travel at incredible speeds, and some very reckless behaviour can happen. I'm much more satisfied of having companies come in who we can control. Geofencing, if it's done properly, is really something that I think is a big plus for them in terms of operating. I know that over the years, the growth of both our population and the growth of pedestrians and active transport and scooters is going to mean that our infrastructure just won't be able to cope in some areas. I know around the Loop View we'll be incredibly busy through there, and a lot of people use that area. So I was very concerned about the problems that Brisbane have had. Disability groups have been very vocal in Brisbane because of the fact that these e-scooters are just littered everywhere, in some cases almost impossible for someone in a wheelchair to be able to get through. So I'm really pleased that we have this geofencing ability to be able to park these scooters in a designated path. I think we should be proud that we've actually got a local company that's been operating 2 years, and they're the only privately owned family-run business of that type. They're up against the big multinationals, and I hope that our approach here doesn't push them out of business. I really hope that there is a future. They're incredible in terms of their proactiveness and the way that they've managed. They don't operate as this is required, or in terms of conditions, till 9 p.m. They only operate during daylight hours because of the issues with the potential of people who are driving these things inebriated. So I think they've taken a risk, and they're very risk averse in terms of the way they've operated their business, but their business has been quite successful. And I know that they have had very strong associations with the council. So I personally would hope that ultimately, if this trial here goes ahead, that we can support a local business. I hope that ends up being the case.
I think, Councillor Natali, you probably, given we'll need to go through a tender process, that's our policy.
I understand that.
We have local benefits built into that to favour local businesses. I don't think it's appropriate to be overtly favouring. I understand the whole focus on localism, but I just think we need to be very careful in honouring our tender system.
Right, I understand that, Mr. Mayor, and I've just made it very clear that, being a local business, that we are introducing competition, but I hope that competition, as I've experienced in retail, the big businesses have got extraordinary amounts of money that they can push any local business out of the market. And I'm just mindful of that. So I am prepared to support this. I think it's at least something that we can move forward in the next 18 months and just see how it would work. And I would hope that we as a council keep very close monitoring of the operations, and any issues that do come up, that we're quickly able to modify those. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Natali. Councillor O'Prey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll speak to it straight away. I don't have any questions today, but the area under the trial is mostly Division 4 and Division 8, and geographically it's very flat except for Alex Hill, which I think to some degree will make it rather safe in that element, and particularly with the width of paths across that very well-worn area, very populated area. My concerns are not at all about speed. I know and understand that they will be able to manage the speed through the technologies they've got right now. I don't have any problems with that at all. In fact, I think that the general population of scooter riders, and Christian's made mention of it a few times, is a difficult one to manage, and I struggle to think that the police will ever be able to manage that. So I think it's something that we may have to, over time, start to live with and manage as best we can, particularly through our permits. What I'm concerned with is not so much the speed, but it's the things like beach accesses. We're on a footpath, even going 12 kilometres an hour, there's blind corners, there's plenty of trees, there's even commercial operations along the front of Dewporth Avenue that people step out on the coastal pathway. I know a number of the surf clubs, you step out of the front door onto the coastal pathway. Introducing another element there is only going to make things a little more dangerous, even though the speed element is under control. It's the element of surprise or not being able to see that I'm a little concerned with. The other thing that I'll be really keeping a close eye on in this trial is the point-to-point hiring, and I do understand the technologies are there, that they're going to be able to keep the scooters in a tidy manner and parked at their locations in their point-to-point hiring systems. And I understand that the technologies allow for the operator, the commercial operator, to keep the bill running if it's not back in the right spot, which is probably going to be a pretty good deterrent. Understanding it's only a few cents a minute, it's not a lot, but I think that will be the deterrent to make sure that the scooters end up where they've got to be. Because a recent trip to Brisbane, I took my daughter for her 18th birthday down to lunch in Brisbane. We had our city fix and we walked around the city. We were very active in our journey around Brisbane, but it was messy. It was absolutely messy. There were scooters left everywhere, and I just thought to myself, this was coming up. I'm thinking, geez, I hope this is really managed well. I'm not sure if just the fact that we're going to run it at 7 cents or 20 cents a minute is going to actually do the deterring, because that's my concern. The amenity around the leaving of the scooters in the spaces where, as mentioned earlier, disabled access, wheelchairs, elderly, just anybody, even somebody on a push bike or walking. That's my real concern. I think the management of speed will be managed. I think that'll come over time. The element of safety is always there with every element that we do. I know that skateboards in the past were the number one reason dads were in hospital on Christmas afternoon, because they're trying the skateboards. It's going to be scooters now. It'll be that for the next few years. I just think we need to make sure that we manage this, and I'll be absolutely keeping my eye on where these things are parked and how they're managed in their amenity. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Prey. Councillor Suarez.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the report, Nikki. Just a question to start off with. Can you just remind us who the potential users will be of this trial?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The expression of interest will be open to any interested businesses to operate their business on the
Sorry, I wasn't very clear. Who the potential customers would be?
Apologies. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The users are likely to be those that are commuting, tourists, for example, visitors to the region. It may always also be families. The intention is that there is the ability for young people to ride with their adult supervisor as well.
Thank you. And then that sort of just goes to what I'd like to speak to now, which is that this project is basically giving council an element of control. We're talking about, I've heard a lot of the other speakers about things that are outside of council's control. By council supporting this project, we're introducing an element of control in terms of e-scooter and e-bike usage on the Sunshine Coast, which I think is really great. And the issues that are raised are really about human behaviour rather than the scooters or the bikes themselves. And the EOI, I see, clearly tries to attempt to address those issues and put them back on the operator as well. I agree with Councillor O'Prey. I feel for the police also. Councillor Natoli mentioned that they will have a job of trying to control those scooter users that are outside of this trial, those private users who do jig with the controls on their scooters to go pretty fast. Thank you for also providing that additional information about the educational campaign that Council will reintroduce, which is the Shared Pathways campaign. I know it was very successful in Division 9, and this campaign campaign, I think, will not only address people who are using e-scooters and e-bikes in terms of this program, but also the private users of those bikes and e-scooters, and also pedestrians. So the whole community will be educated that they all have to share the pathway. So I thank you for that, and I will be supporting this trial.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. Councillor Cox.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I originally had some reservations about this proposed trial, and it was mainly to do with the great success that Council has had in the mobility mapping between Maroochydore and Caloundra, and the great sort of progress that we've made in that space, making it more inclusive and accessible for people with mobility issues. So, like Councillor O'Prey, I've experienced some of these other areas that have had, scooter hire companies in existence, and the challenges around where those particular scooters are left has made access very, very challenging. So that's why this trial, I'm very supportive of the fact that we're introducing some measures to try and control that, because I'd hate for Council's reputation in making such great progress with that mobility mapping to have a trial then come and disrupt that reputation. So that was my original concern, but knowing this trial certainly addresses some of those particular challenges, I'm very conscious of moving forward and giving this trial at least this 18 months period. Obviously there's the review to come, and therefore I'll be supporting it here today.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. If there are no further speakers, I'll go back to Councillor Babarowski to close.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and a sincere thank you to the councillors for their questions, to some extent a degree of interrogation, which is really important. This is an important trial, and we recognise that it does have some inherent tensions in it, but that's the point of the trial to some extent. We will learn a lot. We've already learned a lot from what others have done already and how the technology has shifted, but we will continue to learn. And I wanted to thank Councillor Hungerford particularly for pointing out again that this is an 18-month period with a review at 9 and 12 months, and for raising the concerns about, well, how do you regulate that? How do you learn as much as you can? Who's going to give you the feedback? And one of the things I would like to point out, in my readings, the vested interest by the provider, the service provider, is pretty obvious that if it goes badly, they don't get to have a permanent service. So they've got a really strong vested interest in making sure that they regulate this well and really apply good standards of behaviour. And the indication is that it does happen, because from my readings there was one, and I can't remember enough detail, but what stood out was the number of deregistrations. In other words, if you do the wrong thing, they deregister you. You can't hire from them anymore. It is and it was a big number. It was 22,000 from memory. I can't remember the first number. But anyway, it convinced me that they do apply the standards rigorously. But we will find out, won't we? At the 9 months, 12 months, the 18 months, we'll find out exactly how well applied they are, how well regulated it is, how effective the QPS are, and what the community's response has been. I'd also like to commend Councillor Dixon for pointing out that, look, if we don't proceed with these sorts of initiatives, we are really going to struggle to get anywhere near our mode shift targets. We're currently 85, 12, 3, 12% active transport. We need to get to 20%. Otherwise, the spiralling congestion hits our region hard as we grow. This is part of the solution. And what I particularly I wanted to thank Councillor Joe. Look, you're going to be a big part of the brunt of this, so I understand why you've focused in on it. But thank you for your support. Thank you for the other comments, which really have pointed out that, look, we've really got to make sure that this works. But if I may finish with one point that I think the community will really like about this trial. you get to try the technology. You don't have to go and spend, for an e-scooter, it's about minimum $350 to $1,000. An e-bike is probably closer to $1,000 to $3,000. So it's a great barrier for you to try out this technology for your first and last mile of your commute, or if you just want to check out what this technology will do in a region the size of a small country. So what a fantastic opportunity this is for people to register and try the technology at a relatively low cost and well supervised. So, councillors, I hope that you see enough merits in this to support this trial because it is a very important strategic step for our whole region. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Nikki, and the rest of the team. Item 8.5 is strategic policy, councillor and council employee participation on development assessment matters. I welcome Patricia Jensen to give us a presentation. Thanks, Patricia.
Good morning, Mayor, Councillors and CEO. Today I am seeking approval by Council Resolution to adopt an updated strategic policy titled the Councillor and Council Employee Participation in Development Assessment Matters to replace an existing policy. The strategic policy was originally adopted at a December 2008 Council Ordinary Meeting, which is located at attachment 1 of your report. At the time, in 2008, it was deemed appropriate to have a clear policy to ensure councillors and council employees were aware of their obligations under various laws and for consistency of approach to the development assessment process in the newly amalgamated council. Minor administrative changes to this policy have been approved by the Chief Executive Officer since its adoption in 2008, but until now there has not been a wholesale review of the policy to ensure it remains contemporary and reflective of the legislative environment. The review has enabled a more proactive and positive policy position to appropriately support our community, councillors and the council employees' engagement through the development assessment process. Development applications must be dealt with in accordance with the statutory requirements of the relevant legislation, such as the Planning Act, and due regard to the ethical principles outlined in the Public Sector Act and the Local Government Principles in the Local Government Act. The clear separation of duties, roles and responsibilities of councillors and council employees performing assessment roles and other council employees is reflective of good governance and decision-making practices. Given the substantial change in legislation since 2008 and more recent local government integrity reforms, it is considered necessary to update the existing policy and rename the policy to be titled Council and Council Employee Participation in Development Assessment Matters. You can refer to Appendix A in the report for the proposed updated strategic policy. Subject to Council adopting the updated strategic policy, it is proposed that the Chief Executive Officer will be put in place a supporting operational guideline, to provide additional guidance on the roles and responsibilities of a council and a council employee participating in a development assessment matters. Again, that's located at attachment 2 for your information in the report. The proposed updated strategic policy applies to all councillors and council employees in the context of development assessment matters, including the pre-lodgement, application assessment, decision and appeal stages of a development application. The main intent of the updates made to this policy is to explain and improve the procedures for engagement by council and council officers with participants in the development assessment process, providing greater clarity for all parties. The policy aims to reinforce Council's commitment to open, transparent, efficient, effective and objective decision-making in accordance with statutory requirements, while also providing for appropriate involvement by stakeholders in all the decision-making process. The community can still approach councillors and council employees anytime throughout the development assessment process to obtain information and provide feedback on development proposals, particularly noting that the primary duty of a councillor is to represent the current and future interests of the residents of the local government area. This policy primarily focuses on the specific proponents and participants involved in the development assessment process, such as applicants, consultants and submitters. Councillors and council employees are frequently contacted by these proponents and participants in the development assessment process regarding proposals or specific development applications. While there is no express statutory prohibition on councillors or council employees engaging with proponents and participations in the development assessment process, these interactions must always be carried out ethically, lawfully, transparently and in the public interest. This policy generally does not apply to inquiries about future vision, plans or proposals which are not subject to a current development application. As I mentioned, the new organisational guideline that accompanies this updated strategic policy is intended to guide the council and council employees on their responsibilities in participating in the process. Schedule 1 is a significant component of the content of this guideline, outlining the protocols for participation of a council and a council employee during each stage of the process, along with providing tailored guidance on council interactions and engagement with proponents and participants. It is considered that in adopting a structured participation approach, councils are better able to perform their responsibilities in the public interest and minimise the perception of inappropriate conduct, misconduct or corrupt conduct. This new guideline will be implemented by the Chief Executive Officer once the updated strategic policy has been adopted by Council. As mentioned, Schedule 1 is a significant component of the new guideline and outlines a summary of the participation role of a delegated council employee, a non-delegated council employee and a councillor for each stage of the development assessment process. The delegated council employee participation role in the process is predominantly a technical advice or assessment role, and therefore these council employees are predominantly the assigned assessment team and development services branch who have been allocated to the assessment determination of an application. The non-delegated council employee is intended to only provide technical advice where required. An example of a non-delegated council employee matter would be an internal referral for strategic advice or information on a specific technical assessment matter. The predominant role of a councillor is an inquiry role to obtain information on particular development applications or provide any community feedback. Councillors also have a role in making a decision on a council officer recommendation presented to a council ordinary meeting. It is recommended that councillors should not offer any definitive view of an application and should refrain from referring any proponent to a relevant and should refer any relevant proponent to a council employee for assistance. The risk is the perception of interference and predetermining an application, and the test is one of objective and unfettered decision making. The primary role of a councillor and the councillor is to govern the wider community interests of the community as a whole and to pursue matters in the advantage of council and the region. Council should not confuse their general representative responsibilities with the specific assessment manager role, legal determination responsibilities under the Planning Act. Similarly, council officers should not confuse their roles of providing good customer service with bias or subjective technical advice. For councillors to avoid conduct which indicates a reasonable apprehension of bias, that must ensure that they generally consider the relevant material, the development application and the recommendations by council officers prior to reaching a position. This strategic policy and new operational guideline has been developed in the interests of facilitating compliance with council's obligations under the relevant legislation and to support the integrity of actions of council employees and councils in the development assessment process. On this basis, it is recommended that council adopt the updated strategic policy for immediate implementation, suspend the original strategic policy and note the new operational guideline to be implemented by the Chief Executive Officer.
You happy to move, Councillor Dixon?
Yeah.
Second, Councillor Borowski. Would you like to open?
Yes, thank you, through the Mayor. And, this is really important. If you think about the functions of local government, more times than not, local residents will have queries about planning issues. And we talked earlier about the e-scooters, and I referenced traffic and growth. That's all about planning. And, people see that as a core function of your role as a councillor because they want to give you an opinion. But, don't be too afraid of these rules because I'd say everyone in this room actually follows them well. This is the best council I've been on because I don't hear any complaints about the way my colleagues deal with their residents or our staff internally in DA. It's exemplary. No complaints at all. I'm not hearing anything. And if there was even a suggestion of that, Patricia Jensen, Deb Robinson, the CEO, would pull you up very quickly and tell you exactly why you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. But the rules are there for a reason. It's to keep you out of jail. Because these are the type of things that have actually cost people their jobs and put them in jail before. But this doesn't happen in this council, and this is why the Sunshine Coast Council is in the space we are, and why so many councillors are still here years after they were elected, because we're doing the right thing. And the right thing is to let the staff do their job and not interfere. These rules are quite old. You talked about the last policy in 2008. This needed to be updated because a lot has happened. There's been a lot of change in local government. So this is a bit of a refresher. But don't be afraid of this because we're doing a planning scheme right now. You want to set the rules, you want to change the world, you want to put your residents' suggestions forward, change it in the planning scheme. You want it to be an impact accessible application, you want it to be code accessible, self-accessible, put it in the planning scheme. Let the residents know what you want to do, get their support, and let the staff do their job. That's their job. Once we've done the planning scheme, we step out. And unless, of course, an item comes to an OM like today, we can put forward our residents' views. We can vote against an application. We had a puppy farm come here recently and we actually voted against by majority the officer's recommendation, and I believe that's correct. An alternative was moved and we put forward the wishes of our residents. That's the power of a councillor. You're elected by the people to represent their position where you see fit, and we do that and we do it well. I fully am supportive of this, but while I'm here, I'm actually just going to take a second to pass on my feedback, because in this term of council, I've had much less to do with DA than ever before in 16 years. The staff are doing such a fantastic job that they're working well with the applicants. The applicants don't call me. They don't ring up and say, oh, we're feeling hard done by, we have to put an awning here or an extra few car parks here and there. They're actually conversing well with the staff every single day of the week, whether that's engagement through meetings and workshops with the planning industry or just a telephone call. They're doing their job and they're doing it well. And I'm not getting those complaints from the community. So all in all, to Deb, the team, and also Patricia and the CEO, I think DA's in a great space, the best space it's ever been, in my opinion. And this really solidifies to our residents our involvement. So if anyone believes that you're doing the wrong thing or believe that you should be doing more, you can clearly show them what our roles and responsibilities are. And this is very important, particularly in this day and age.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Hungerford.
Through you, Mr Mayor. After 18 years, I've probably been through more of these than most. I'm going to take a bit of time with this, and I may need an extension to explain fully, so that members of the community and applicants understand the roles and limitations that we have as councillors, as assessment managers. Now, there's been a lot of legislation since 2008, changes in this area, and it's got more complex over time. And anyone that's done a diploma of local government and covered this section will know how complex it is, but how the responsibilities and penalties for crossing certain lines have become very clear for councillors. Now, the Planning Act 2016 prescribes the circumstances in which a local government decides a development application. In some circumstances, a local government delegates the power to certain council employees. Now, the Planning Act 2016 requires that the assessment manager, usually a council or a delegated council employee, does not predetermine an application and cannot consider matters that are relevant or unrelated to a development application. Development applications must be dealt with in accordance with the statutory requirements of the Planning Act 2016 and with due regard to the ethical principles outlined in Section 4 of the Public Sector Ethics Act 1994 and the local government principles in Section 4 of the Local Government Act 2009. The clear separation of duties, roles and responsibilities of councillors, council employees performing the assessment roles and other council employees is reflective of good governance in the decision-making process. Councillors and council employees are frequently contacted by proponents and applicants in the development assessment process regarding proposals for specific development applications. There is no express statutory prohibition on councillors and council employees engaging with proponents and participants in the development assessment process. These interactions must be carried out ethically, transparently, lawfully, in the public interest. And this is where it becomes clouded when you get the emotional thing of a contentious development application, and we've all experienced it. Now, the development assessment process is a statutory process. Its inference in law is that it must be transparent, unbiased, unfettered and legally correct. The provisions of the Planning Act 2016 require that the assessment manager does not predetermine an application. Now, these principles are proposed in the strategic policy. We've had it there before with the changes that have been made in the Act since 2008. It's good for us to update it and clearly define it, which we're doing with this one here today. Now, to put it quite clearly, at the different stages of a development application, it goes through a process. We're involved with that every step of the way, but we have limitations on what our involvement is at different points. So I'm going to cover this for councillors, because we're assessment managers, but the staff also have similar guidelines on how they deal with it. At the pre-lodgement phase, this is before an application is lodged. Involvement is cautionary for a councillor. Cautionary approach to offering any definitive comment to applications in relation to the application. Then it gets lodged. It becomes a live DA. This is a significant point at which conduct should be considered. Again, for a councillor, cautionary. The cautionary approach to offering any definitive comment to applicants in relation to the application. Very important, because that gets you in a lot of trouble. Then you get to the decision stage. Our involvement as councillors is inquiry into the decision making, so we can formulate, because we need all the information in determining our stance on any application. This is where applications are not determined by delegation, they're determined by council. It's going to come to this floor at the end of the day. Councillors should avoid making any commitment about their likely decision on the application, as further information and facts may be presented during the course of the council meeting convened for the purpose of considering the matter. And over 18 years I've had a few of those, where I had an opinion and the debate went on there, when the information came forward, it changed my view. Do I need an extension?
I'm going to ask you for that right now. Someone prepared to move, please. Councillor Dixon. Second to Councillor Babarowski. All those in favour? That's carried. Please carry on, Councillor.
Then you get to the post-decision phase. This is where requests come from applicant for changes to the approval. Again, cautionary for councillors' involvement. Councillors should take caution with dealings and seek direction from the appropriate coordinating manager if in doubt. Don't give any commitments. And then an application can be at an appeal stage. The applicant appeals the decision to council or some of the terms and conditions, things like that. Again, involvement for a councillor should be nil and cautionary. Once the appeal is lodged, it is inappropriate for councillors to enter into discussions with applicants, appellants or third-party submitters aimed at brokering a settlement or a compromise different from the corporate decision reached by the council or its delegate. Very important phase. So to sum it up, the guiding principles, the primary duty of a councillor and the council is to govern in the wider public interest of the community as a whole and to pursue matters to the advantage of the council and the Sunshine Coast region. That's a balancing act. You've got a lot of working parts in a development application. So to be specific, as the assessment manager, our role and legal determination responsibilities under the Planning Act 2016 are very clear. For councillors to avoid conduct that includes a reasonable apprehension of bias, we must ensure that we genuinely consider the relevant material, the development application and recommendations by council officers prior to reaching a position. Now, I think it was 2012. I had 3 contentious DAs coming before council, and they're going to be determined after the election. That was a tough thing to go through, because when I went to meet the candidates' nights, my opponents had no restrictions, but I had my responsibilities under the Act to not predetermine or show a bias. And that wasn't a very pleasant process to go through, I can tell you. But more importantly, for the community to understand, respectfully put your views to us and your points. Do not demand we have a position on it, and particularly the media, who will run an article before it's coming up to a council meeting and contact each councillor wanting to know where we stand on it and how we're going to vote. That is not respectful of councillors' roles and responsibilities under the Act, and it is very unfair. Because it's a difficult thing, and I know each of you have experienced them, and balancing that under the Act, your responsibilities and your commitment to your community to take all that information on board. And I believe the guidelines we have here are very clear and give a transparent view on what those limitations are. So I put it to you, councillors, this is very solid. It's very sound and open and transparent and easy for the applicants and the community to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Suarez.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. I just have a question to start off with, Patricia. This policy is a renewal of a 14-year-old policy. We had a lot of input from the community and industry that went towards the creation of this policy. Because if this goes through today, we will be having this available online, and we will be all adhering to this. Will there be a review of this policy to see whether or not there are any areas that need to be tweaked? And if so, what would the timeframe be for a review of that?
Through you, Mayor, the response to that would be that I'd look at an annual review, more than likely, but if there's any legislation changes that might happen throughout that time, we would also have to do a review. And also, it depends if we get feedback and we see that there is something that needs to be fixed, we will bring that back and make those changes happen if there are actual issues with the policy and how it works.
Thank you for that. It just doesn't mention any review period in the officer's recommendation, so I just wanted to understand that a little better. I really appreciate the work that's gone into this policy here, and one of the things that I also really like and I'd like to point out is you've not only spoke about the roles of the delegated employee but the non-delegated employee, and that sort of extends from the CEO down. So the role of the development team is to be able to assess development applications without fear or favour, and you use the word yourself, integrity, and I think that's really crucial. We come under intense scrutiny when we do have development applications that are contentious. And you shouldn't have to succumb to pressure, not from the applicant, not from the councillors, not from council staff, and not from the community either. You need to do your job according to the Planning Act and our planning scheme. I also wanted to touch on 2 elements, and we talked about, or you raised it actually yourself, Patricia, during our information session, when a number of questions came through. There's a difference between assessment and communication, and our role as councillors is communication, and your role is assessment. So one of the areas that I still have a bit of a problem with, and this is why I'd like to see how it will play out, and what feedback we may get from proponents and also from the applicants and the community, is post-decision stage. And I'll raise an example, which is Barnes Lane. And I know, Mr Mayor, we used Barnes Lane in our State of the Region address recently, and I talk about them very positively. It was an impact assessable application that was fully supported by the community because they interacted with the community rather than applied pressure on myself or the development team in terms of what the outcome may be from their assessment. And when that decision was made and it was supported by council and councillors, the post-decision stage is the area that I have some issue with, because if we can't speak about that application for that appeal period, which was 20-something days?
Yep, 20 business days.
20 business days. You know, we can't support the decision that was made by council or that was made by the assessment officers, which may be a good thing for the community. So that's the one area that I'm still a little uncomfortable with, but I'd like to see what comes out from the community and the applicants after this has been endorsed, I hope. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. Councillor Babarowski.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, it just occurs to me that this is a fantastic opportunity for all of the relevant stakeholders, which is essentially the entire community and those who wish to put a development application in, to better understand the process. So to some extent I'd like to suggest or recommend to the CEO that we have a look at a communications strategy around this policy, should it be supported, to help the community genuinely understand this is really more about, if the bottom line to me is about timing. If you understand the timing of when you can argue a case or not argue a case, or ask a councillor to intervene or argue a case on your behalf, it's very much about understanding the timing and the roles. And it's really hard for the general community to understand those timings and those roles. Generally, they don't bounce into this process until it hits them with something that's going to happen locally that they feel strongly about. And they find it really difficult to understand when they knock on the door of the councillor. They go, we want you to represent our opposite view or our particular view. And you have to go, look, you really have to understand the concept of predetermination, how that is not helpful to you. And if I was to look like, if I'm predetermining the outcome in any way, I actually disadvantage you. It's really hard for them to get that as an understanding. So this, after 14 years, is a great opportunity for us to maybe produce a fact sheet, something of that order if it's not already anticipated, to go, look, here's some basics. And get the community to understand our role more thoroughly, and that will translate into more confidence. Because the thing I think most of us have experienced is that they just doubt your sincerity if you're not willing to say, no, I will absolutely argue that that proposal is wrong in your view. You're constantly saying to them, look, I'll need to absorb all of the players, all of the facts, even during the debate on the day, before I can come to a conclusion. And that's very hard for them to understand, but it's a very important, as most of the councillors, all of the councillors appreciate and have pointed out, it's a very important concept. And I think this is an opportunity for them to understand it better. So I'd like to suggest we might do that. Otherwise, I genuinely think this is a really good mechanism for a good signal to the development fraternity, a good signal to the community, and an even better signal to the media. Don't do that. Don't give the community an impression that you're not being a champion by choice. That's really not fair on anybody. So hopefully this will help everybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. If there are no further speakers, I'm going to go back to Councillor Dixon. No need to close. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks, Patricia. That might be an opportune time to take a short break. Could we be back, please, at 11 a.m? We'll resume the meeting at item 8.6, disposal, lease of Darling Point Marine Agents as trading as the Boat Shed Restaurant. Hand over to Lee Pryor to give us a presentation. Thank you, Lee.
This report has been submitted to seek an exception from Council in accordance with the Local Government Regulation 2012. The exception seeks to enter into a direct lease to the Boat Shed Restaurant located at 38 Cotton Tree Parade, Maroochydore. on the basis that they're an existing tenant over the current land. The current tenant under a lease redeveloped the original boat shed structure to a restaurant in the late 1990s. The current tenant has established the premises as a relaxed dining restaurant which caters for both dine-in patrons and takeaway. The current 10-year trustee lease between council and the tenant is due to expire on the 31st of January 2023, and council and the current tenant have been negotiating the terms for a proposed 10-year trustee lease for the past 4 months. The land on which the restaurant resides for the trustee lease comprises of state government-owned land and is managed by council under trust. The lease premises is some 500 square metres in area and comprises of a fully fitted out, freestanding, single-level restaurant building, as seen in the aerial photo. The full essential terms and conditions of the proposed new trustee lease are outlined in the confidential attachment 2 of this report. The intention is to enter into a 10-year lease commencing on the 1st of February 2023, and council will become the owner of the building and improvements at the end of the next lease term. It is recommended that council resolve to apply an exception under regulations, as the council officer's position is that the proposed terms are comprehensive enough to support entering into a trustee lease with the current tenant. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Natoli, seconded Councillor O'Prey. I'd like to open, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Lee, for the work that you and your team. Right back, I know the King Martins had a lot to do with bringing this to fruition today. It's never easy going through these processes. Obviously, the choice of whether you go out to the public or whether you support an existing business. Councillor, I was fortunate, I suppose, back in 1997, that this was one of the first things that I had to deal with in giving them an approval. So it's incredible that nearly 25 years later we are dealing with an extension. And I have to say that when I first went there, I thought they just wanted to put a kiosk there. It was actually a plan for a restaurant, an old dilapidated boat shed. And I imagine myself sitting there thinking, how amazing would this be for the community? And it has become an institution. It's just become an incredible, iconic location, enjoying that beautiful views out to the Maroochydore River. And so I'm really pleased that we've got to a situation where we are asking for a ministerial exemption to be able to now offer them an extended 10-year lease. In doing so, without exposing the commercial details, the offer that they've put forward is a substantial increase and it's way beyond what I suppose I would imagine most others would through a tender process. It also, after 25 years and at the end of this lease, transferred the actual building, which is owned by them, even though it's a council is trustee and the government owns the land, they've owned the actual physical structure, and there'll be quite substantial renovations being undertaken over the next 3 years, and this will be, again, an incredible outcome. So I totally support it. Thank the team for their work, and hopefully we'll see this particular facility being used well and truly into the future.
Thank you, Councillor Natoli. Councillor O'Prey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too would like to support Joe in this, and cotton tree's been in my backyard most of my life, Mr. Mayor, and I've got a lot of nostalgia around cotton tree, particularly the boat shed area. I'm very, very supportive of this today. Just reflecting back on, like Joe did, the boat shed restaurant used to be just that, a boat shed. It used to have a couple of kayaks in there and some clunky old tinnies that were in there, and back then they used to have a water slide in the river, which we could never do today. They used to have trampolines in the ground, and we'll never be able to do that today. And then, of course, the cotton tree pool was there as well, which has been another one of my haunts for most of my life. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And these guys have been there 25 plus years. In the old days, in the early days of me being council, we used to call that an iconic business. and some of the iconic businesses that we've had on the Sunshine Coast, and in particularly that area like Swan Boat Hire and I know that the skydiving group, and there's a few others around the coast that used to get that. They never even used to have to apply for permits and things like that. So 25 years is a long time, and like I said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They're marvellous operators. They've been there for a very, very long time, and I'm very happy that the council staff have got together and negotiated this out, and it's a win-win for everybody. I understand that there's a considerable amount in this lease, and that's good news for the ratepayer, and it's also good news for the operators. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Bray. There are no further speakers. I go back to Councillor Natali to close. Not necessary. Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Lee. Move on to item 8.7, proposed local law amendments 2022, and invite Belinda Bennett. Thanks, Belinda, for a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, everyone. The purpose of today's report is to present proposed amendments to the local laws. As you are aware, the corporate governance branch facilitate the local lawmaking process. A thorough review of the local laws is undertaken every 3 to 5 years to ensure our local laws remain current and responsive. There are 4 ways in which amendments are identified. Requests direct from the community, from yourselves as councillors on behalf of your constituents, legislative amendments, and requests from the operational and business areas across council who are responsible for implementing those local laws. The local lawmaking process requires 3 statutory reports to be presented to council. The first, today's report, is to propose to make amendments. This process makes no decisions except allowing us to take those proposed amendments out to community consultation and state interest checks. The second report will be to make the amendments. This report will include feedback from the consultation processes and seek a council decision to make or not to make those amendments. The third report is to consolidate any approved amendments into the actual local law documents. With all that in mind, today's report just seeks a council resolution to propose to make amendment local law number 1, miscellaneous 2022, and amendments subordinate local law number 1, miscellaneous 2022.
Thank you. Someone to move? Councillor Hungerford, thank you. Seconded, Councillor Natoli. If you'd like to open, Councillor Hungerford.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. This is merely part of our regular review of our local laws and policies and things to make sure we're relevant and up to date. The main one here is this to go out to public consultation on things we're looking at. So the ones that just stuck out to me, and most of them are pretty straightforward from what I can see. Inclusion of provisions to immediately dispose of chemical products and biological goods. We need to upgrade how we deal with that. Provision to immediately dispose of impounded items of negligible value to reduce the cost. The longer we hold them there, it costs us money. If they're only minor things, we can't identify who owns them. We're best to move it on. Creation of a permit type for building work for noise outside of standard hours. I get a few of those in my area from time to time. Addition of dog leash areas. There's a list of those that have come on over time. They're not formally recognised, so it's important to upgrade that. Amendment to the minimum standards required for a dog enclosure, and whether that's a dog enclosure, especially a dangerous dog, and make sure we have that really up to date. And definition of minimum standards for keeping animals. Different animals people keep, and because as we're getting more urbanised, we get a lot of conflicts with that. I've got a few with roosters in my area lately. And the creation and ability of council to add or change the boundaries of residential parking permit areas by publishing maps on council's website, rather than amending the subordinate local law, which has to come to the council here. So that's a very time-wasting process. and increase the unauthorised disability parking penalty to align with state government amendments. So state government legislation changes from time to time. So this is just administrative, it's tidying things up and making them relevant for today. So well done, and we look forward to that coming back to council and getting things up to date. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and well done, Belinda. This area is one of those dry areas, where you're dealing with. It's almost like the law. Anyone that wants to be a lawyer, like my daughter's working towards now. There's a lot of detail, a lot of process. You have to get it right. Two of our main areas that take long processes, that take 12 months, 18 months sometimes, are local law amendments and creations of local laws, as well as planning schemes and planning scheme amendments. So they are regulated in terms of the process, and this process obviously allows the community to have their say, state government interest checks, and finally endorsement from council. It is appropriate that local laws are needed. We need rules in our community. We need to make sure we keep our community safe, healthy, and the amenity of our local areas are really important. So when communities feel like something's not going right, we look at our local laws and see how we can better manage that. So I think our community appreciates the fact that we do review everything. Over time things change, and we just have to make sure that our local laws are relevant to the times that we are living in. Thank you. Thank you, Belinda.
Thank you, Councillor Natoli. No further speakers. No need to close. Councillor, put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. That motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Belinda. Moving on to item 8.8, the future operation of council quarries. I'd like to invite Scott Taylor and Paul Skillen to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, councillors and colleagues. This morning I'd like to talk to you about our paper, which is the purpose of the report is to seek to externalise the management of our quarries, business and sites, and do that through an expression of interest. I'll go through the first four parts of the agenda before I hand over and invite Paul to come up and talk to the expression of interest process. But by way of summary, the quarry's been in operation since 1959 and been operating very well up until the last couple of years when we decommissioned the asphalt plant. Through reviewing the performance of the quarry and getting specialist advice from a subject matter expert, it's become apparent there are opportunities to improve the performance of both the quarry and the operations. In doing that review, we've looked at alternative options and we'd like to put forward a proposal where we externalise the management of the operation of the quarry through a lease arrangement following an expression of interest process. The key benefits with this approach for the council is that, in particular, we'll work with a subject matter expert who can improve the performance both at an operational level but also financial sustainability of the business. We can do that in a way where we promote sustainable development of the operations of the quarry itself, and specifically ensuring the management of native species and natural habitat. We can also support through the selection of an appropriate partner the sustainable development of products that can be used within the border region of the Sunshine Coast. And finally, as the owner of the asset and the land, we at the end of the lease can take our responsible view at that point in time about the most appropriate use of the land moving forward for the benefit of the council. We've taken time to review and discuss and identify a number of key risks to both the performance of the operations of the quarry as well as the site and the community, and through that approach adopted a risk management which has informed both the process and the form and the content of the proposed lease agreements. Clearly, as we go through the expression of interest process, we'll have to manage these risks on an ongoing basis, and we'll take feedback from the market when we get the response through the expression of interest, so we don't want to preempt that. But also some of the issues we identified with will require ongoing management through the implementation of any new changes in commercial operation of the quarry. Finally, there's no foreseeable legal issues at the moment. Whilst we've had good legal support and review, that will be enduring as we continue to go through, including any changes to federal and state legislation moving forward. But recognising the risks outlined in the previous section, we've taken those into consideration in the structure of the approach through the expression of interest. I'd like to now invite Paul to continue.
Thanks, Scott. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. The process that has been determined as the best option for securing and identifying an appropriate operator of the quarry has been an expression of interest process. That's a process that's provided for under the local government regulations. It requires a resolution of council to support the invitations of expressions of interest, and it requires that resolution to contain the wording to justify and explain the reasons why it's in the public interest for council to undertake an expression of interest process. What an expression of interest process is a two-stage process where we invite the market to come to us with proposals to operate, in this case the quarry, and it is from those expressions of interest that we go into a decision-making process about how we would like to see that quarry operated and the terms of the agreement under which we would see that occur, and from that we conduct a short list of respondents and invite from those shortlisted respondents a closed tender. What that does is allow us, after having received submissions on what can be done there, it allows us to align our thinking and our belief on what the quarry, how it should operate, and invite tenders that align with that. The process can be conducted, I would recommend, over a couple of months. So the proposal that I have in the implementation plan, put forward in the implementation plan, is releasing the expression of interest in January, leaving it open for a number of months, about 3. The reason for that is that it is an extended period of time, but the reasoning behind that is that those who are about to receive the expression of interest or become aware of it don't have sitting around a business plan for operating a quarry that they didn't have awareness of. So it allows them significant time in order to be able to put through a business plan for themselves to justify the operation of, in this instance, the quarry. Excuse me. Finally, there is the resource and budget implications that we have there. Some have been expended already in the development of the reports that are attachments here today, as well as identification of some of the expenses required in order to get us from where we currently are to a concluded contract. That is the recommendation that's before you today.
Thank you, Paul and Scott. Councillor Babarowski, you're happy to move. Councillor Hungerford, happy to second. Would you like to open, Councillor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Look, it's actually my privilege to move this motion, as it's been a long journey, and I think I'd really like to first give my thanks to the review team. It's actually been a very long process because the community expects us to really place a high value on these community-owned assets. We are very fortunate as a council and as a community to have these particular assets subject to this report, Image Flat and Dulong. Incredible assets, very valuable, not only now but way into the future. And this process essentially allows us to explore what are going to be the advantages or the opportunities to partner with external operators who are perhaps at a different scale, different levels of experience, and we can test whether that's a good partnership through this process. So obviously to me that makes sense for us to proceed on the basis that we can look for a model how we can optimise these very valuable assets. It's probably worth reminding ourselves that this doesn't mean that we won't get further reports to council on what the expressions of interest produce, and particularly if there are any different budget implications of it. So, councillors, we've essentially recognised in this report process that the risks have described a reasonably rocky road ahead, and that we are now presenting with a rock-solid proposal. So, look, being the last item in the Caloundra Chambers, I thought I would pay a small homage to all of the councillors that have been in this chamber, and particularly Tim Dwyer and his dad jokes. So I just did a pathetic approach to a couple of dad jokes. So thank you very much, councillors. I hope you see the seriousness of this opportunity and support the recommendations.
That was a bit rocky, Councillor. I want to go to Councillor Law.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I have some questions, please, and we'll see how we go with that first of all. Clearly, we talk about the public interest, and the public interest, as I see it, has two very distinct elements. We've heard in the statement of support of the motion that it's in the public interest that we make great use out of this asset. But we've also got to make sure that we recognise and understand the community interest and the local community residents. So I'm really looking for some comments specifically around what this might mean with a commercial operator in there who isn't necessarily going to have the same community lens when they're looking at making a profit. So in relation, first of all, Geelong Quarry at the moment is only allowed to have 2 blasts per year. Will that be maintained and sustained through a commercial contract?
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. In particular, yes, it will. We'll maintain alignment between our role as the asset owner with any proponent to come in and occupy the lease. That alignment extends to our values and policies around the environment, safety and the operation, and those licences that encumber us will be aligned back to back with any proponent. So that includes, and I can confirm, that 2 blast limitation on any future operator.
Thank you. That's really important for the local community there, and there are quite a number of people who live very close to the quarry. When we think of the Image Flat Quarry, a commercial operator is likely to want to really make the asset work hard, as we've heard. What could we expect in the operations there in terms of, will there be a dramatic increase in the number of blasts? And linked with that, what can we expect around the increase in vehicle movements and also the hours of operation?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. It's a very good question. I think we've covered the first question around the quarry blast. The second one around the operating rhythm of the quarries is that we currently have an operational licence for 24/7, but for the last few years we've been containing that to 6 a.m. to 6 p.m, and in fact we've probably been working from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. We would expect again that the operator would align themselves with the 6 to 6 operation, but it is noteworthy that they can at any time make an application to extend their area of operation and hours of operation beyond to 24/7. We would expect that an efficient operator will be effective in managing the transport task and the number of truckloads. We do note that around that particular area of the quarry, the road systems are currently going through a safety review to ensure that any increased traffic will be managed according to our standards around safety and our service levels, and that's something that will have an enduring responsibility and obligation to manage with the new operator.
Okay. Thank you. I think a follow-up question to the hours of operation, currently it's 24 hours. If an operator was to want to increase the hours beyond 6 till 6, who would they apply to? Does it come to us as the landowner, or does it go to Department of Mines and Natural Resources?
Currently, my understanding is that we already have the existing opportunity to operate 24/7, but as the owner, in the way that we'll structure the lease and the conditions, they'll need to come to us as the owner. So there'll be no external authority that they'll need to get approval for, and we'll need to structure that in a way that we give the quarry operator every opportunity to consider that and put forward a business case, which will include the sensitivities around being a good neighbour, and for us to consider that at a point in time if that comes up in the future.
Okay, thank you. And the distinction with Image Flat Quarry, I just want to go back on, is I don't believe they have any restrictions on the number of blasts. So with that quarry specifically, can we anticipate that a commercial operator will be increasing the amount of activity, the number of times there is a blast each year?
That's a very good question, Councillor. I would expect that through the expression of interest process, we'll seek to maintain our current operating posture and obligations within that process, and that any application within the expression of interest will tease out that both as a procedural and an operating issue. And then I don't want to speculate what may or may not come from market, but we'll need to look at that through the implementation process.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And obviously, we've been very sensitive around caring for the environment, both in, as we use the quarry, that it's rehabilitated, but also there's a risk of future clearing to allow access to the rock. I noticed in the mitigation that we've got that we will be excluding the koala habitat from the expression of interest. I just want to make sure that, as I read that, it's not included in the EOI. Can you just confirm that for me? It's not in the EOI.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. It's not in the EOI. We will take and maintain ownership for the environmental performance of the quarry site. We've excluded the koala habitat from that as a protected and endangered species, and that is meeting our council obligations to meet the state legislation regarding the management of koalas in Queensland.
Okay. That's excellent. I'm encouraged by that because I believe that's the way we would behave, and it's important that we manage future operators in the same way, so thank you. This may be for Paul, I'm not sure. In regard to the procurement process, if this goes ahead today, what reports will come back to us as we go through that process, noting that we have to be very mindful of the commercial protections for everyone around going through this type of process?
Through the Chair. Thank you, Councillor. The legislation only requires the expression of interest to get that resolution. So in terms of what is actually required, there is nothing further required in terms of progressing right through to the end of the process, as the CEO has the delegation to enter into a contract that results from the expression of interest and tender. However, with the experience we have in having done these, we've done 3 or 4 expression of interest followed by tenders, and I've seen on each occasion previously that that we have come back to inform council between the EOI and the release of the open tender about where we have got to. Now that, to be fair and precise, is not to invite you to evaluate what should have occurred. There needs to be a clear delineation between that decision-making or evaluation of those that make the shortlist, but in terms of providing information to you and council on where we're up to, between those two processes has generally been the case. I've also seen for some of the larger ones where before awarding the tender, there's another for information circulation to council. Again, not to invite an evaluation of what should have transpired. We need to keep those evaluators doing the evaluation, but in terms of keeping you informed, they're the 2 times where I've seen in the past that we've done that.
Okay. That's great, thank you. Looking into the future, 2 questions. Do we expect with a commercial operator that the life of the quarry may in fact be reduced if the quarry is being operated at optimum levels? And the second question to that, what will we be doing to make sure we've got the appropriate funding for the rehabilitation?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Mayor and Chair, I think in the first instance, if you look at the learning curve of technologies in any industry, the way that we're advancing in pursuit of sustainability, we're hoping to select a partner that will actually extend the useful economic life of the quarry, but in a manner that also aligns with our sustainability objectives as a region. I think one of the opportunities in remaining our ownership under this lease framework we've come up with is it allows us to influence the research and development of the product in a way that better improves the quality of supply for the Sunshine Coast region in meeting our future development needs. So in some aspirational sense, I guess, we're hoping that we actually extend the life of the quarry because it'll better and further the sustainable development of the Sunshine Coast. In the second one, we currently have a book value for make good on the quarry at the moment, which is a current year-to-date value, which I can seek to find out. But our intention would be through the life of the quarry, we'll maintain that so-called sinking fund to meet our obligations to make good at the end of the quarry's economic life.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for taking those questions. If I may speak to the motion. The councillors, as we discuss this matter, as I mentioned, there are 2 things. There is the benefit to the whole of the Sunshine Coast Council of getting someone with the right skill set and expertise to actually operate and manage a quarry. But the 2 quarries that we own happen to be in Division 10 in rural and semi-rural settings at the edge of Nambour at Image Flat and up at Geelong. So I have to be really mindful that if we go and pursue a commercial activity that will certainly have a far greater benefit for the whole of the Sunshine Coast, what will that mean? And are you certain that the protections that we're looking at putting in place will protect the interests of that local community and the local population there? Will we have a similar, and if not better, arrangements to interact and communicate with our local people who live in, that's where they go home at night? They're not going to want to be disturbed by the operations of a significant quarrying and extractive industry. So please be sure that if this was in your community, this is strong enough and robust enough to care for that community while caring for the whole council. Will we be able to manage the operations and the hours of operations effectively? Will we be able to make sure that the road and transport infrastructure is up to standard, and we'll be able to maintain the truck movements safely as they pass through the edge of Nambour, going nearby the hospital, nearby the milk factory, past a residential retirement resort? We want to make sure that we are not making those people's lives any worse than what it is. I do recognise that it's been a little bit quieter of late, because at the moment we're not operating the quarry particularly well. And so we're going to have, if this goes through, it is going to increase movement, but it mustn't go back to anything worse than it was before. So make sure that, would you be happy with this happening in your area? Are there enough protections from your point of view to make sure that you can look your residents in the eye, knowing that you've done the right thing? So I'm going to listen to the further conversations of what you think around those sorts of things while I make my mind up of which way to go with this. It's been a huge piece of work done very well by the team and by the consultants who've helped us. But we need to make sure that this looks after all the public interest, and that must include the local people as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing what else we have to say about this, and thank you very much to you and your team.
Thank you, Councillor Law. Councillor Hungerford.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I strongly support this today. This is about Council always looking at our operations, our assets, and getting the best return for our ratepayers at all times. It is prudent to go out with an expression of interest process, because it's actually a preliminary look at what the interests are and what the different options coming into us are before going to a closed tender process. I think it's summed up pretty well in Part C of the officer's recommendation. Calling of expressions of interest is in the public interest, as the process will allow Council to receive a diverse range of competitive proposals that enables Council to identify the solution that best aligns with the interest of the public and Council. So I think it's a very important first step, and the quarry is a very important asset for Council and for that resource for the region into the future. So I think this is a very, very solid move. Let's go out there and see what the interests are and what different proposals come to us. Then we determine the path we go from there. So this is a very prudent way of doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Natoli.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question. At the end of this process, that we've a report then provided to Council for a final decision, is that correct?
Through the Chair, no, Councillor, that it does not need to be. I was saying that we could inform you at each of the steps. The CEO currently has the delegation to enter into a contract that results from an expression of interest in a tender. So it does not need to be there.
So in that particular case, through this process, if there are elements that may not be in the public interest, how do we deal with that? How, that's left to the CEO to make a decision, and it's just
Thank you, Councillor. And through Mr Mayor, I would think that any material departure from the intent of the paper and the expression of interest would come back to Council through the CEO, and that would be a materiality threshold the CEO would be well accustomed to making.
So So if I could speak to the motion, Mr Mayor, I totally support that Council has every right to continually look at how we can better manage the assets that we have. These assets are as old as I am, so they must be getting a little bit tired in terms of the need of injection of funds and new technologies that are around today compared to what they were 63 years ago. There's been a huge advancement through there. And Council often has to review what type of businesses we want to be in, whether we should be running them, whether we should be getting contractors or other companies to be able to undertake activities that, again, are in the interest of the Council and the interest of our community. So I totally support us going through this process. I do want to recognise Lisa Devine's effort from the very beginning. She's driven this process of review. I know that she's not here today, but she'll be very pleased if Council does support the recommendations that we go ahead. She's put a lot of work, and I really want to thank her. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Natoli. I'd just like to make a couple of points in relation to some of Councillor Law's concerns in particular. And the first thing I'd remind all councillors is that your first priority is what's best for the region. Now, I appreciate that sometimes has conflicting impacts on your own domestic or division. And that, I guess, has pluses and minuses. These are key resource areas that have been identified for a long time. I was born in 1959, so it's as old as me. And I'm sure that neck of the coast was quite different in 1959 to what it is today in terms of the number of residents living nearby. But again, those people would have had every opportunity to understand that there was an operating quarry nearby. And that resource, whether we like it or not, is absolutely essential, as are other key resource areas across the coast that were identified many years ago in most cases to deal with the expansion and growth of our region. The record of this council in engaging with the private sector when you believe they're in a better position to contribute to outcomes or projects for the region is pretty important. And I think of projects like the CBD, like the airport, like the submarine cable, as three examples where we've now formed partnerships or other arrangements with people who are very well placed to maximise the opportunity. Even developments like multi-deck car parks will be challenged by people, but yet serve a need for many others. I see the quarry as being in the same boat, and that's not ignoring the fact that there is quite a different population living around those areas now to what there was back in 1959. But major facilities that we've encouraged, funded, such as the stadium in Kawana, absolutely essential for our broader community, but there'd be people who live nearby who probably think it wasn't such a good idea. Some of the work we're doing around transport corridors, again, transport corridors that are been set aside for years and years and years, sensibly by somebody realising that, hey, we're going to need this in the future because of the growth that's going to occur in this area. Even things like the new hospital facility, was never really considered as little as 15 years ago in its current location. So I think this has been a challenge for council in operating these quarries efficiently and effectively. And I think having an operator who specialises in that area is really important. So I'll be supporting the recommendation. What I'd like to see us do, however, is start thinking about what does the end game look like in respect of those two quarries. What is possible for us in future to develop, enhance, remediate, whatever the answer is, such that those become a really beneficial part of the region rather than just a hole in the ground. And we've got a few of those already. And typically in the past, they've been seen as a great place for a new landfill facility. Again, that would be very difficult for us to achieve today, and that's why we're working on a whole range of other programs to ensure that we don't have to use that sort of solution. I think we really should be thinking longer term. What is possible? What's been done elsewhere in these sort of facilities that we could achieve a really beneficial outcome for the broader community? Thank you. If there are no further speakers, I'm going to go back to Councillor Babarowski to close.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillors, genuinely for the questions, and again, particularly Councillor Law for really an understandable interrogation of how this impacts on the local community and that tension between the greater good on a regional level versus the impacts on the local. And we do deeply understand that that's an important tension to understand and do the best you can to design the mitigations. And again, I think, look, the Mayor, I think, pointed out that we've got some positive experience in this space where we can take a council asset, negotiate a relationship with the private sector and get a win-win. I probably prefer the language to be optimise rather than maximise, but that's just my subtle distinction on, look, optimising means that you get the best outcome possible, not the maximum outcome possible. But I knew that's the same intent of what you meant. I think, again, really the essence of this is that could we have continued to operate the quarries successfully in a competitive environment and provide the resources both to ourselves and to the market? Look, the review basically answered very unlikely. You're going to need to invest significant capital into these assets. And at our scope and scale, we would find that very difficult. This process will essentially reveal whether the scope, scale and experience of private providers can work with us successfully to do that, to invest in these assets and make sure that the community outcome is a really good one for potentially 20, 30, 50 years. These assets are going to get more valuable, not less. I'd like to certainly reassure the local councillor that I think the opportunity in this approach is that we preserve the very best possible operational standards. And look, I mentioned that in my division, I actually have 2 hard rock quarries that are privately run and owned. And generally speaking, you get little moments, clusters, where they get new management or something happens to change their operations, and it brings that attention to the community, and you have to do the best you can to go back to the conditions of operation, back to the conditions of approval, and make sure that they're rigorously adhered to. I'm more confident in this situation than I would be in those 2 privately owned quarries. Not that I, again, can cite you opportunities where we've been unsuccessful in getting them to operate with minimum impacts on the community. I'd also point out that, there was a quarry, a hard rock quarry proposed in Beerburrum, which I think was mentioned earlier on, maybe it wasn't, that this council actually recommended not to proceed as the body politic. We reviewed that, and I was very proud of this council that basically said, no, we think that the supply of those materials is sufficient, and the impacts on the Beerburrum community would be too high. So we do have a record of really understanding how quarry operations work and when it's a good situation, when it's not so good. I think this process will reveal a model, a future model, which is the intent of operations, which hopefully will optimise the operations and the outcomes of these quarries. And I sincerely hope that you'll give us an opportunity to explore that, in fact, proceed along those lines, recognising that should major changes be proposed by the proponents, we have a CEO who understands our intent there's no doubt in my mind that our CEO will protect the broader community's interest. And if this process generates some alternatives we didn't see coming, or they say, no, we can't do it that way, we'd like to do it this way, then I would have confidence that the CEO would not proceed without some further investigation, further interrogation, and potentially some further recourse back to council. So I'm very confident, councillors, that we've got a good process here, and I ask for your support.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. I'll put the vote to the motion. All those in favour? So we've got Councillors Quarries, O'Prey, Hungerford, Patoli, Dixon, Landsberg, Babarowski, Jamieson, Cox. Opposed? Councillor Law. The motion's carried. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's move on to, there are no notices of motion. Fantastic effort. Petitions, we have two. The first, 10.1, is Councillor Landsberg and Caloundra House.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a petition that we've received from 26 neighbouring properties of Caloundra House. This is, they've raised major concerns with the operation and management of the facility. It's been part of the accreditation process. It's recently changed hands, and now it'll be coming up for review with the state government in the Department of Housing and Communities. This petition, I'd like to see that we can actually put it as part of our accreditation process of when we actually review Caloundra House as well. It can be submitted during the new accreditation, which is due to be renewed in 2023 next year. So I'd like to just hand this over to the CEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Landsberg. Seconded by Councillor Babarowski. All those in favour of receipt? Receipt of the petition, thank you. That's carried unanimously. And the second is 10.2, Councillor Dixon, City Downs Dog Park Extension.
And through you, Mr Mayor, I'll read the prayer from the petition. It's from Mr Ryan Elliott of Budrum. In 2018, upgrades to the Sippy Downs Dog Park were put to the community, had council's funding and approval, and we're ready for a much-needed expansion. This is an easy win for the area and is fully funded. I think he's talking about a previous project. The current dog park is very small in size and does not give our best friends the opportunity to stretch their legs. There is a lot of unused land next to the current dog park, and the area would create a perfect large green field for local residents to enjoy with their dogs to enjoy play. Once we've got enough of our furry friend support, the money and upgrades would be available in the 23-24 financial year from July 1 next year. So just because I've got a minute to speak to this, just so people know, in 2018 I had a fully funded project at Sippy Downs, obviously large suburb, with a very small dog park that I'd built 10 plus years ago, and residents wanted it upgraded. So I got all the money, design, planning. The construction team were literally about to start it, and there was a bit of a riot by local residents, very upset. Nearby the dog park believed they weren't consulted enough, so we completely canned the project just because the locals had changed their opinion. It's just come to my knowledge that residents actually want the dog park again, and there's 153 signatures here to support it. And I've said to the resident that if we can get the support from the locals, I'll make, hopefully with council's endorsement, the money available in the next budget to expand the dog park. But of course we'll do community consultation again to make sure the neighbours are fully aware. Sippy Downs does need more open space areas for dog parks and off-leash areas, and I think this would definitely give the residents what they're looking for, and that's a place where they can take their pets without having to go to Budrum or Mountain Creek. So I'll present this to the CEO with 153 signatures.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Someone to second? Councillor Hungerford, thank you. All those in favour of receipt? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillors, that brings us to the conclusion of this last meeting for 2022, last ordinary meeting for 2022, and indeed, as we said earlier, the last meeting here in these chambers that have served us very well. And Megan was giving me a little bit of history to say that Warren Bunker was here 27 years ago when the chambers open. He's just around the corner there, taking a very low profile. And also Katrina, you were here 27 years ago and a bit longer, in fact. So that's fantastic that you're here to see us off. I just wanted to make a couple of comments before I close the meeting. Obviously, Christmas is just around the corner, and the new year of 2023. I think most of us have sort of been stuck in the last 3 years of 23 to 22, trying to manage pandemic and whatnot. It all seems a bit of a blur, really, but hopefully things are improving. I do want to take the opportunity to wish you all and your families a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And those of you who are taking leave, and I think most are taking some leave, please make sure you enjoy it. Certainly to our leadership team, thank you to you on the great guidance that you are providing to our teams, significant as they are, and the matters we deal with here often, involve their efforts in implementation and making sure that the things we want done get done. I also want to obviously again recognise that the next meeting, which is on the 25th of January, that's a Wednesday from memory, because of Australia Day being on the 26th, it's been moved forward today, will be at the new City Hall in Maroochydore, which of course will be open on Saturday. And there's obviously great public interest in that, which is wonderful to see, and I had the opportunity of being there briefly yesterday to engage with some of the staff who, to a person, I think were pretty impressed and felt really good about the new workplace and the transition, if you like, from one to the other. In particular, I'd like to thank our employees, and we celebrated our employee awards yesterday, and that was outstanding and a great feeling of enthusiasm, I think, from everybody. Obviously, you can only have a limited number of winners, and there's 2,000 employees, but as I said yesterday, very often it's the contribution, the encouragement, the drive provided by others that help our best be their best. So I think awards are great at acknowledging people, but I'd like to acknowledge all of our employees for the great job they do, and particularly the great job they've done in managing the COVID pandemic and being guardians for our community and setting a good example for others to follow. That creates expectations that we'll need to continue to deliver. And I want to wrap up just by saying thank you very much to our meeting management team. Natalie's not here today, she isn't well, but we do recognise her and the great role that she plays. We recognise Megan and also Lauren and today Katrina. We want to thank you. You play a really important role, and councillors would be aware that the efforts of our meeting management come with a minimum of disruption, great level of professionalism, and something that can ensure councillors that they're confident in the information and advice they're getting. So to wrap up, everybody, have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we look forward to bigger and better things for our region, our community and our council in 2023. Thanks very much, and I'll close the meeting on that note.